You're on, Dave.
Okay, the battles for Chattanooga is the title of this talk, because really it's not just Missionary Ridge, it's also Lookout Mountain, a couple of smaller actions. Here's what General William T. Sherman said about it in later years, specifically describing the fight for Missionary Ridge on November 25th, but he really meant to embrace all of the battles that made up about a month's worth of action. Sherman said it was a magnificent battle in its conception, in its execution, and in its glorious results. The whole plan succeeded admirably. General, oh, by the way, the painting here is of General Grant on Orchard Knob on November 25th, viewing the Battle of Chattanooga. It's available through you can find it in the Library of Congress. And I won't butcher the gentleman's name who painted it, but it's easily determined. It's one of my favorites because it shows a whole host of commanders. Excuse me a minute. The minute you turn on your laptop, you start getting notifications that drive me crazy. So, Chattanooga, why is it important? Why did it become, and I think it's one of the most important places in the Confederacy. And that picture shows you exactly why it's important. This modern image is taken from the top of Lookout Mountain, and in it you can see one of the busiest railways in the United States, one of the busiest interstates in the United States, and the Tennessee River, which, second to the Mississippi, is about the busiest waterway in the United States.
Excuse me, Dave,
yeah.
Dave, you haven't started the slideshow. You're still inside the program.
Huh. It says I'm sharing the screen.
Yeah, that's different than starting the program to run the slideshow.
I don't know how to do that.
Go to slideshow with your mouse.
Slideshow on the Zoom program, or never mind.
On your, you might have to go out of sharing the screen and start it and come back in.
Yeah, okay. I got to figure that out. I'm sorry. This is why I prefer live. Okay. Where is the start slideshow button?
It should be up on the menu bar in the program.
Yeah, I got slideshow, set up, rehearse, custom.
So if you click on that, it should say start slideshow.
Okay, I think I got it. Now we got to go back to Zoom. All right, can you see? Well, you can see. What can you see now?
We can see the great view from Lookout Mountain, and it's a lot bigger than it was. Yeah, that's the okay. That's the point. I'll shut up.
All right. So you can see all the transportation assets that come together here. It's the only water level passage through the Southern Appalachian Mountains, really from Virginia all the way down into northern Alabama. So if you're going to get to what is by 1863 has become Confederate industrial plant, the powder works at Augusta, the various foundries and things at places like Selma. Atlanta has become a major resource. So all of these things, or all of these objectives, lie on the other side of those mountains. And Rosecrans initially, General William Stark Rosecrans, attacked or launched a campaign to capture Chattanooga. He succeeded, but at a cost. He lost the Battle of Chickamauga and was driven back into Chattanooga. That defeat, let's see here. Okay. That defeat led to his replacement, a replacement by General Ulysses S. Grant. Now, I argue that Grant's sort of rise to fame, the rise to the top level of command in the American Civil War, Vicksburg is an important piece of that story, but it's not the complete story. And the proof of that is after Vicksburg surrenders on July 4, 1863, Grant's army is essentially stagnated in Mississippi for another 2 months, through all of July and all of August. And the War Department, the U.S. War Department, doesn't know what to do necessarily with Grant's army. They talk about breaking it into pieces, sending 10,000 men to Banks, sending 10,000 men into Arkansas. The troops that had been loaned to Grant are now starting to be pulled back. It's really not until Chattanooga or Chickamauga happens and a crisis develops that Grant suddenly is thrust into command. Edwin Stanton basically commandeers a special train and rails to meet Grant. They meet in Louisville, Kentucky. They have a conference. Stanton travels with 2 sets of orders. He has one set of orders that leave Rosecrans in place. Well, both sets of orders create something new, the Military Division of Mississippi, which gives Grant command over the departments of the Ohio, the Cumberland, and the Mississippi. So it gives him sweeping authority over the entire West. And one of those orders leaves Rosecrans in place, and the other goes to General George Thomas, replaces Rosecrans with Thomas. Grant, according to the story, almost unhesitatingly picks the orders that replace Rosecrans with Thomas. I won't go into Rosecrans and Grant's relationship. There's been books written about it. It's not good. But I also think that this is not necessarily Grant's decision. Edwin Stanton has set it up to be Grant's decision so that the government, especially him as Secretary of War, he does not take the blame for replacing Rosecrans, who's very popular in the Midwest, especially in Ohio, which is a critical state for the Union war effort. So I think Grant understands the writing on the wall and pretty much follows the lead. If I can say, Stanton sort of extends one set of orders a little further out than the other, and Grant knows which way to pick things. So Grant replaces Rosecrans at the end of October, and then he travels directly to Chattanooga. He can't get into Chattanooga except via a difficult mountain road. He has to ride over Walden's Ridge. The Confederates have almost isolated the city of Chattanooga. They control Lookout Mountain. They control the Tennessee River. Obviously, they have fortifications and troops from bank to bank on the south side of the river. The Confederates can't put significant numbers of troops on the other side of the river because they don't have the bridging assets, and frankly, they don't have any of the material, and especially the livestock they would need. So the Chattanooga is not entirely besieged, but Grant's basically follows the supply line that you see from Jasper up over the top of Walden Ridge and back down into Chattanooga, a 60-mile supply line. He arrives finally in Chattanooga on October 24. He meets with George Thomas. Before he departs Bridgeport, actually, he meets with General Rosecrans, who's come out of Chattanooga on the same way. Rosecrans explains what his intentions are. And Thomas and Rosecrans both have outlined this plan to reopen at least a portion of the Tennessee River to wagon traffic so that they can get supplies more easily into Chattanooga. There's no way that the road over Walden's Ridge is going to be able to sustain the roughly 35 to 40,000 troops in Chattanooga through the winter. Already mules and horses are dying by the hundreds. They can't get enough fodder. The roads, as the rains come, become mud. It will be impossible to keep Rosecrans and later Thomas in Chattanooga unless a better way is found. The plan is what will become known as the Cracker Line, essentially a combined operation, an amphibious and multi-pronged operation that will drive the Confederates out of Lookout Valley, not off Lookout Mountain, but out of Lookout Valley. Grant says this is a great plan. His only wonder is how come they didn't implement it already? The answer is actually fairly simple. It's because nothing was ready before Grant arrived. The Army of the Potomac has sent the 11th and 12th Corps on an extensive rail journey to reinforce Chattanooga. Rosecrans has been building pontoon boats in Chattanooga in order to have the pontoons ready to throw across in multiple places. And also Bridgeport has become a Union boat building center. The Union Army is building steamboats. Really more steam barges. They're not paddle wheel, steamers that you think of when you think steamboat in the classic sense. But they need those steamboats ready in order to haul supplies up the Tennessee as far as Kelly's Ferry, and then they can via wagon move those supplies just a few miles into Chattanooga. But all of these components have to be ready, and they're not really ready until the end of October. So Grant's, as a new man coming in from outside, doesn't fully grasp the logistics and the complexities of it. Fortunately for him, Thomas and Union engineer William F. Smith, Baldy Smith, and Rosecrans have all developed the elements of this plan so that they're going to have everything in place. Now, I should say something a little bit about the meeting between Thomas and Grant. It's famously described by really only one source. There are three sources that I know of that talk about the meeting. One of them is James H. Wilson's memoir, and it's written late in the memoir period, 1912. And Wilson describes a lot of tension between Grant and Thomas. But Porter, in campaigning with Grant, Horace Porter describes a meeting that's sort of similar in outline, but very different in tone. And then one of Grant's classmates, Joseph J. Reynolds is now the chief of staff to the Army of the Cumberland, and he's also there. And he says there was no tension that night between Grant and Thomas. But we'll talk more about that in a little while, because I do think that this campaign creates a great deal of tension between the two men. This is Braxton Bragg and James Longstreet. We're going to switch sides a little bit here to talk about the Confederate side of the equation. Bragg and Longstreet are feuding. They've had a falling out after Chickamauga. Pretty much everyone has a falling out with Bragg after they've served with him a while. In order to kind of separate Longstreet and from Bragg, and also begin Longstreet's movement back to the Army of Northern Virginia, Bragg agrees to send Longstreet and about 10,000 men into East Tennessee. East Tennessee is, well, Sherman once said, recall, later writing to Grant when talking about East Tennessee, he says, you will recall that East Tennessee is my horror. East Tennessee and Lincoln's obsession with East Tennessee go all the way back to 1861, go back to trying to support the Unionists in East Tennessee, relieve them from what the North regards as oppression. The Tennessee will send something like 30 or 35,000 troops into Union Blue. So obviously there's strong sentiment there. And so any threat to East Tennessee, finally Burnside has liberated it in the same movement with, in conjunction with Rosecrans that leads to Chickamauga. And the retreat back into Chattanooga sort of isolates Burnside in East Tennessee. He has a lengthy supply line wagon drawn all the way back into Kentucky. So when Longstreet starts to move into East Tennessee, Grant, who's being bombarded, almost every telegraphic communication that comes from Lincoln, comes from the War Department, closes with a little coda on it that says, whatever you do, don't forget about East Tennessee, or don't forget Burnside. And so by the time this happens, Longstreet begins to move on November 7th, or November 6th, actually. Grant's been in Chattanooga about 2 weeks, and so they still have telegraphic communication. And so he's been bombarded with these messages on an almost daily basis from Washington saying, East Tennessee, Burnside, East Tennessee. So when Longstreet begins to move, then Grant reacts and has kind of a panic is too strong a word, but he reacts very rapidly. On November 7, he orders George Thomas to immediately attack Missionary Ridge. If he does that, he figures either that Bragg has weakened himself so much by sending Longstreet away that they will be able to defeat what's left of the Confederate Army outside of Chattanooga, or at the very worst, Longstreet will have to come back. So Thomas, who has a better grasp of the tactical situation and also understands that he can barely move his artillery and supply wagons at this point. They've basically reduced the horses to each battery can only pull 2 guns. And Thomas says we can't attack. He talks to William F. Smith, the chief engineer, and Smith goes to Grant and sort of convinces him that an attack is not possible. But Grant is extremely frustrated because of that. He will, in a letter just before Sherman arrives, in another 8 days, Sherman will be there on November 15th. But Grant talks about the period after this, when he can't do anything, when Thomas won't attack, and he calls it well, he later will call it the 2-week period that leads up to the fighting. He calls it the worst 2 weeks of the war for him. This is a man who fought through Shiloh, fought through Donelson, was relieved of command effectively by Halleck after Shiloh, sort of pigeonholed as overall second in command, and almost resigned. And so for him to think that these are the worst 2 weeks of the war I find it very indicative. Grant is extremely frustrated because while the pieces are in motion, he can't do anything with them yet. It's taking much longer than he wants to get everything accomplished. These two men, Sherman and Thomas, become Grant's primary subordinates. Grant orders the first thing he does actually when he is given command of the department or the division of the Mississippi is order Sherman to bring 20,000 men to Chattanooga as soon as possible. It will still take Sherman almost 3 weeks, or actually a little more than 3 weeks. Sherman himself will come on ahead and arrive on November 15th. In the meantime, there's George Thomas, who Grant can't seem to get moving. When Sherman arrives, and on November 15th, they go out to a place called Fort Wood outside, now it's the Fort Wood neighborhood in Chattanooga, but then it was outside the city and there was a Union fort there. And they look around, and Chattanooga sits in this wonderful geographic bowl. So you can see Missionary Ridge, you can see Walden's Ridge to the north of the river. If you're looking at Missionary Ridge and you look over to your right, you can see the sort of iconic prow of Lookout Mountain. It's a panoramic view, and Sherman, with his usual tact, looks around and says, "Well, why, General Grant, you are besieged." Yes, we are. Grant also shares privately with Sherman a piece of information that when it finally comes out after the war will really upset a lot of the members of the Army of the Cumberland. Grant takes Sherman aside and he says, "I think the Army of the Cumberland's demoralized. They won't attack. You're going to have to show them how to attack." And that really becomes the basis for Grant's final plan or ultimate plan to relieve the siege of Chattanooga. Now, Sherman's got his own issues. If you've read anything about Sherman, you know that he's a volatile, sort of an unfiltered personality. He's often described as frenetic and high energy. He's a little bit different here at Chattanooga. For one thing, just before he leaves Memphis to come to Chattanooga, his son, actually his favorite son, Willie, dies of a fever. He dies in the Gayoso Hotel in Memphis, and Sherman sends the rest of his family home and spends another couple of days in the Gayoso Hotel. And in a letter that he writes about that experience, he says he saw Willie everywhere. He felt he was actually being haunted by Willie. And so Sherman is carrying a certain amount of sort of emotional baggage that he's gonna, I believe he has a hard time shaking off. But nevertheless, he gets to Chattanooga. They discuss, Grant and Sherman discuss the plans. Grant's basic plan is a repeat of the November 7th plan, but using Sherman instead of Thomas. Now, bear in mind that with Hooker, he's commanding the Army of the Potomac detachments, the 11th and 12th Corps, or those parts of that corps that get there. He's got 2 divisions of Howard's 11th Corps and a division of Slocum's 12th Corps. He's brought about almost 20,000 troops. Sherman has brought a little more than 20,000 troops, and Thomas still has about 40,000 troops in Chattanooga. So all told, the Union Army has roughly 80,000 men available. And before November 24th, when they're first discussing the plans for combat, for how to relieve the siege, the Confederates hold Lookout Mountain and a line on Missionary Ridge, and a line of trenches across the floor of Chattanooga Creek Valley, which is the valley between Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge. The Cracker Line operation captured Brown's Ferry, and after a fight at Wauhatchie, that freed up Lookout Valley, and that was Union held. That happened at the end of October. Now we're nearing the end of November. So Grant wants Sherman to secretly march through the valleys of Walden's Ridge, deploy north of the city of Chattanooga, launch yet another amphibious invasion like they did at Brown's Ferry. They will land at South Chickamauga Creek, and then Sherman's going to march towards the north end of Missionary Ridge, towards Tunnel Hill. And Grant figures that if Sherman is able to seize Tunnel Hill, which at the time they're first talking about doing this, November 22nd, November 23rd, is undefended or very lightly defended. Bragg only has about 45,000 troops available. Grant has him by nearly 2-1. And so Grant figures that if Sherman seizes Tunnel Hill, it will open the door towards severing the connection up into East Tennessee, will isolate Bragg from Longstreet's force that's operating up there, and probably force Bragg to retreat south. That's what he wants to do, is force Bragg away from East Tennessee and back, ideally back into Georgia. But Grant, he doesn't trust Thomas. He doesn't trust the Army of the Cumberland, so he doesn't include them in any assault plan. He wants to take the 11th Corps away from General Hooker and give it to Sherman as a reinforcement. So Hooker doesn't have most of his troops either, and so Hooker plays no role in this. So Grant is really only attacking or planning to use about a third of his entire army. Between a quarter and a third to attack Bragg. The famous Battle of Lookout Mountain. I love this painting. It's the original is currently on display at the top of Lookout Mountain in the National Park Visitor Center there. You might know who commissioned it by the guy astride the white horse in the center of the painting that everybody is looking at. That's General Joseph Hooker. Hooker comes west on sort of a redemption tour. He needs to, he's lost the Battle of Chancellorsville. He resigned his commission right before the Battle of Gettysburg. He didn't expect that resignation to be accepted, I don't believe. I think that he was trying to force the government, the War Department, to see things his way. And so he was stunned when he was relieved of command right 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg. And now he's come west looking to get back into the war. He's looking to redeem his reputation and restore his career. So even though Grant doesn't want to attack Lookout Mountain, and there's arguments pro and con about attacking Lookout Mountain, Thomas wants to seize Lookout Mountain so that they can open the rail line as soon as possible into Chattanooga. They have to start rebuilding bridges over the Tennessee and at a place called Running Water Creek in order to do that. But they have to have control of Lookout Mountain before they can use the road and the railroad that run between the Tennessee River and the northern nose of the mountain. In this painting, you can actually see the railroad cut. If you look over to the left of the painting, you'll see that notch. That's the railroad cut. It's not there today. Major engineering and the addition of the interstate have changed all of that. But in several depictions of Lookout Mountain in 1864, you'll see the notch, the rail cut. Hooker, well, Grant doesn't want to drive the Confederates off Lookout Mountain just yet, because he figures if they do, if they take Lookout Mountain, the Confederates defending it and defending Chattanooga Valley will simply retreat to Bragg's position and strengthen Missionary Ridge. And Grant's right. That's exactly what ends up happening. But through sort of a bit of fate, Hooker has one division from the Union 4th Corps, one of the Army of the Cumberland, one division, Geary's, of the 12th Corps of the Army of the Potomac, and one of Sherman's division of the 15th Corps under Peter J. Osterhaus, which, due to a storm which washed out the bridge, the pontoon bridge, on November 23rd, is basically trapped on the wrong bank of the Tennessee on November 24th. And so Hooker now has 3 divisions. He has about 15,000 men. And in order to use them, he asks for permission to conduct a demonstration against Lookout Mountain. He actually conducts a very clever, very well thought out plan, diverting the attention of the Confederates along the base of the mountain. He marches 4 brigades south to a place called Light's Mill. They cross the Lookout Creek and then march up the side of the mountain and deploy along the side of the mountain. And so I know visitors, when they go there, they go to the top of the mountain, they look down and they say the Union charged up this. You have to say, no, they didn't charge up that. Instead, they charged along the side of the mountain and swept, caught the Confederate defenders by surprise, Walthall's and Moore's brigades, and fought the battle above the clouds, as Montgomery Meigs, Union Quartermaster General, who was present at the time, called it. This happens on November 24th, and it's a startling success. It's a battle above they call it the battle above the clouds, really in the clouds, as one Union soldier said. It was a rainy, misty, very clouds obscured most of the battle. At the same time that Hooker is fighting the Battle of Lookout Mountain, Sherman effects the crossing of the Tennessee, and on November 24, up north, if you remember that map that we go back to, crosses the Tennessee River and secures a lodgment on the south bank on the south bank of the Tennessee, north of Chattanooga. So Grant has, by the end of November 24, Lookout Mountain is now in federal hands, and Sherman is on the correct side of the river. Before we talk about November 25th and Sherman, this is Colonel Eli Long. He conducts a very short but very important cavalry raid against Cleveland, Tennessee. We'll click here to a map. Nope. Sorry, I double clicked and got to figure out, well, real quickly, I can summarize. I don't need to go back to that map. Cleveland is about 15-20 miles from where Sherman crosses the river. It's important because the Georgia and East Tennessee Railroad runs through Cleveland, and by going to Cleveland, destroying the depot and the railroad, and tearing up the telegraph lines, Eli Long is able to ensure that James Longstreet doesn't hear about whatever happens at outside of Chattanooga on Missionary Ridge in a timely fashion. And just as importantly, won't be able to return quickly, won't be able to use the railroad back from East Tennessee. So it's highly successful in that sense. And as I was studying this, I discovered another very interesting piece of information that was totally was complete serendipity for the Federals. They didn't realize the effect this would have, but Eli Long destroys the only copper rolling mill in the entire South at Cleveland, Tennessee. You need copper for, especially for percussion caps, for musket, pistol, ammunition. You can't fire a muzzle loading weapon without a percussion cap. The Confederates have some stocks of sheet copper on hand so that they can continue to make percussion caps for a while. But by the spring of 1864, and certainly into the summer of 1864, the Confederate government is so desperate for sheet copper that they are basically sending out special purchasing agents to buy whatever sheet copper they can. And one of the primary sources for that turns out to be copper stills in the Carolinas for both alcohol and pine tar. So by the summer of 1864, the Confederates will face a real ammunition shortage. Well, actually, they don't in 1864 because they find methods to overcome that. But had the war lasted into the summer of 1865, it's kind of an open question whether or not they would have been able to continue to fight to supply their soldiers with percussion caps. So let us return to Grant's plan. Here on November 25th, well, on November 24th, Sherman advanced inland on the afternoon of the 24th to a place called Billy Goat Hill. But he didn't realize that Billy Goat Hill, and you can see that on this map, is a separate hill than Tunnel Hill, which is at the northern end of Missionary Ridge. As a matter of fact, on November 24th, and even on the morning of the 25th, Sherman told Grant that he had captured Tunnel Hill, or he had driven the Confederates all the way down to just about the tunnel on Tunnel Hill. It's called Tunnel Hill, obviously, because of the railroad tunnel that cuts through there. So Sherman's attack is based on a set of wrong assumptions. And he doesn't discover these how wrong his assumptions are until the morning of November 25th. November 25 dawns cold and clear, very different than the battles, the fighting for November on November 24th, which was misty and rainy and cloudy. So that amphitheater is suddenly visible to everybody in both armies. One of the first things they see early on the morning of November 25th is the 8th Kentucky U.S. Infantry scaling all the way to the top of Lookout Mountain and planting the colors right up there at the top by Umbrella Rock, where so many pictures are later taken. And Sherman starts to move inland. He's moved inland. He's on Billy Goat Hill, and as the morning dawns and as the sun comes up, he realizes he's on the wrong hill, or he has not taken the hill he's supposed to take. So he will launch a series of attacks, small pinpoint attacks, really, 2 and 3 regiment attacks, brigade-sized at best, in an effort to capture Tunnel Hill. Patrick Cleburne is rushed up to Tunnel Hill at the evening of the 24th. ironically, had Grant waited another 24 hours, if the operation had been delayed 24 hours, Claiborne would have gone to East Tennessee. He was his troops were at Chickamauga Station Depot, ready to board trains headed for East Tennessee. But after Lookout Mountain, and especially Sherman's Crossing, Bragg recalls Claiborne, and so he's there to defend Tunnel Hill. The morning attacks are failures. They don't make any progress. The Confederates are entrenched at the top of the hill. They've dug in. They have a battery position, and the attacks fail. And Sherman's supporting efforts, you'll see, like Loomis's brigade that moves into the open in front of Missionary Ridge, makes no progress either. Sherman repeats some of this in the afternoon. This is a map that shows, say early afternoon, noon to about 2 o'clock. He has a couple of brigades sort of on the northern shoulder of Tunnel Hill, but they can't go any further. Additional attacks by men of the 11th Corps and from Sherman's Army of the Tennessee detachments, Johnny Smith's division, just don't make any headway. As a matter of fact, in a couple of instances, Claiborne counterattacks. They capture a number of Federals. And so as early as noon on November 25, Sherman has sent a written dispatch to Grant, who was only about 2.5 miles away at a place called Orchard Knob. Sherman sends really a 3-word message: "Where is Thomas?" Grant has been observing this whole battle with this perfect visibility on Orchard Knob. I often tell people, especially when we go there, you're not liable to find a more significant spot or count more generals in one spot than you are on Orchard Knob. You have Ulysses S. Grant, George Thomas, Gordon Granger, the 4th Corps commander, Thomas J. Wood, the divisional commander in the immediate area, Montgomery Meigs, Quartermaster General of the United States Army, who's come to help supply issues, Brigadier General Baldy F. Smith, or William F. Smith, Baldy Smith, the chief engineer. You also have David Hunter, who is sort of on a fact-finding and inspector general mission for Abraham Lincoln. And he's come to Chattanooga and he's present. You also have a couple of interesting tourists, a man named Smith, who's one of Grant's cousins. He's a civilian. He's on vacation. He stopped by to see Grant in Chattanooga. This is definitely an adventure vacation. And Grant says, "Sure, come on," and brings him along to Orchard Knob on November 25th. You have another man who is there through an Englishman who's there through the graces of the Sanitary Commission, and he's also sightseeing, so he gets up on Orchard Knob. The reason I mention all these people is they leave us all these accounts of Grant and Smith and Thomas and Wood, all these people who were there. They leave all these accounts about what happened on Orchard Knob. And interestingly enough, very few of those accounts agree. Sherman has stalled out by about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Grant is growing increasingly agitated. He, according to John Rawlins, he's getting very frustrated with Thomas, and so is Rawlins and Wilson, James Wilson, who's an aide-de-camp to Grant there. Other accounts say that Grant appears to be calm and and relatively non-committal. He doesn't say much. But it's very clear that Sherman has stalled out. And so in order to support Sherman's attack, Grant decides that he will order Thomas's 4 divisions, 4 available divisions that are in this position, to advance against the center of Bragg's line on Missionary Ridge. Now, Bragg has created 2 defensive lines. One is at the foot of the ridge, and then after the retreat off of Lookout Mountain the night before, they've begun to erect defenses at the top of the ridge. So Grant orders Thomas to advance to the foot of the ridge and take the rifle pits at the base of the ridge. The Army of the Cumberland views this or is later to understand that this was a demonstration to help Sherman. But it's going to turn into something much different. The Federals get to the foot of the ridge, and all of the Federal brigade and divisional accounts differ a little bit about whether they were supposed to stop, or as August Willig, the German-born brigadier in one of Wood's brigades, commanding one of Wood's brigades, said, "I thought I was going to the top right from the get-go." But they get to the base of the ridge. The Confederates have split their force between the bottom and the top of the ridge. The men on the bottom don't really, they have varying orders, and they're not sure if they should hold or fall back. And so they begin to retreat up the base, up front to the top of the ridge. And the Army of the Cumberland were taking fire from the top of the ridge, and seeing the Confederates retreat, suddenly start to go forward in about 4 or 5 different places. And they don't scale the ridge in battle lines. It's much too steep and much too difficult to do that. Because the armies have been here for several months, they've been here since September, basically. The terrain is largely denuded of trees. So it's very open and very visible. So when the Federals start to go up, everybody can see them go up. Today, if you look at the ridge, the side of the ridge has grown up in timber again. But at the time, it was very open. You could see them all going up. And they went up sort of in arrow formations. A set of colors would be at the V, the top of that formation. And then regiment after regiment started to climb the ridge. And Grant, according to at least one account, Grant has various reactions. Grant asked Thomas who ordered those men up the ridge, and Thomas says, "I don't know, it wasn't me." Gordon Granger famously claimed that he said he didn't know who ordered the attack, but the title of one of my books was "When Those Men Get Going, All Hell Can't Stop Them." Another account has Thomas about ready to send out recall orders to stop them from going up the ridge. And Grant says, "Wait a minute, let's see what they can do." And what it turns out they can do is they crest the ridge. Bragg's line at the top of the ridge breaks in several places. And all of a sudden, it looks as if the Confederate Army of Tennessee is being routed. Now the troops that facing Sherman aren't routed, but there we go. But Hooker isn't finished with his role in the Battle of Chattanooga. On November 25th, he is ordered to move to Rossville, which is at the southern end of Missionary Ridge. It's an important notch in the ridge. And he seizes control of the Rossville Gap. He's delayed for a while at Lookout Creek as they try and rebuild a bridge. But once he seizes the gap, then Hooker deploys his 3 divisions, again, still from 3 different armies, and sort of flanks the Confederate line at the very southern end of the ridge. That part of the Confederate line is weakly held, more held by outposts. When John C. Breckinridge takes a brigade down there to try and oppose Hooker, it's a brigade of Alabamans. Most of those guys get captured, but it's really Hooker who, especially Osterhaus's division, which comes up the east side, the backside of Missionary Ridge, and gets almost, really gets to Bragg's headquarters site. If you go to the Bragg Reservation today, one of the most significant War Department tablets on that whole piece of property is the Osterhaus Division tablet there on the southeast corner of the reservation. Doesn't get the attention it probably should. I think the park needs to have some sort of big flashing neon light there to draw people to it. But it means that as these Confederates are falling back in the face of all these Union attacks coming from the west, coming from the front, they're finding more Federals in their rear. And this is how Bragg ends up losing nearly 3,000, something like 3,500 prisoners to capture. So while the breaking on Missionary Ridge is important, Hooker's movement is even more important because it solidifies the success and means that no one's going to get away, or very few are going to get away comparatively. As I mentioned, Hardee's Corps, which is with Claiborne, which opposed Sherman, they're not broken and they retreat in good order. But so on the 26th, Grant launches a pursuit. Patrick Claiborne is assigned the rear guard action. Joseph Hooker is leading his conglomerate corps, and they collide again on November 27th at Ringgold. And this time, there will not be a Federal success. White Oak Mountain is north of Ringgold Gap. Taylor's Ridge is south of it. Claiborne deploys his troops on both sides of the gap on that ridge. This time, Federal attacks either through the gap or attempts to outflank the gap by climbing White Oak Mountain. All meet with defeat, and it's on November 27th. After Ringgold, that General Grant declares the pursuit of Bragg over. Bragg will retreat to Dalton, Georgia, and then spend essentially the winter there. That's where the campaign for Atlanta will begin in May of 1864. But Grant then turns around and sends Sherman and Gordon Granger all the way up into East Tennessee to take care of Longstreet. When they get to Knoxville in early December, they discover that Longstreet has departed. He's failed to take Knoxville. He launched one attack against Fort Sanders, and it was a disaster. And far from starving, Ambrose Burnside basically is able to hold an early Christmas feast for Sherman and Gordon Granger when they get there. Granger and Sherman do not get along on this expedition to East Tennessee. That will set the stage for, essentially Granger's relief in 1864. So that's why Gordon Granger or Oliver Otis Howard will command the 4th Corps of the Army of the Cumberland, and not Gordon Granger, because Sherman didn't want him. I think I have a couple of takeaways from the battles for Chattanooga. First of all, I think the two clear stars are Joseph Hooker and Patrick Claiborne. They were successful in every endeavor. They, in Patrick Claiborne's case, probably saved the Army of Tennessee an even more demoralizing defeat. And in Hooker's case, they solidified the victory, the triumph on Missionary Ridge. The Confederates don't necessarily downplay Claiborne, but he's definitely earned a significant spot, and he will have his own issues about why he doesn't get promoted. That's another program. But Grant will, after the war, well, during the war and after especially, Grant will do a lot to sort of downplay Hooker's role in the campaign. He dismissed the Battle of Lookout Mountain as nothing but poetry, which I think does a great disservice to the 800 or so federal casualties, the men that fell there. Grant knew full well that it was a significant action and it was important. Sherman and Hooker have personal relationship problems that go all the way back to their shared time in California before the war. To sum it up succinctly, Hooker borrowed money from Sherman's bank, not once, but twice. In rough economic times, had to default on the loans twice, which forced Sherman and Halleck's bank into bankruptcy. So I suspect that Sherman still somewhere along the line wanted Hooker to pay back those loans. But at the end of the day, I keep going back to that quote that I read from Sherman. Magnificent in execution, perfect. Was it really? Nothing worked. Nothing that Grant planned to work worked. All of the things that Grant did not plan or didn't intend are the things that succeeded brilliantly. Now, I will say this. I think it does, after the war, many of Grant's partisans really tried to make this seem to be Grant's greatest battle. Napoleon had Austerlitz, Robert E. Lee had Chancellorsville. This is Grant's finest battle, his masterful campaign. Surprising, I know, because Vicksburg has emerged to modern history as really the pinnacle of Grant's generalship. But there was a significant effort, and certainly it solidified Grant's reputation. I think it's because of this battle that Grant goes to Washington in March to accept command of all the Union armies and accept his new commission as the Lieutenant General of the United States Army. A 3-star rank, the highest rank to date, to that date issued or commissioned in the Army. But in doing so, in making this to be Grant's masterpiece, of clockwork precision masterpiece, they missed the essential fundamental reason why I think Grant was so successful. He didn't give up. He didn't stop. If something didn't work, he tried something else. And that show, that relentless nature kept grinding through the wilderness and the Overland Campaign. It certainly is on evidence in Vicksburg. True military genius is not the master plan that works perfectly, because no plan works perfectly. Moltke's famous dictum that no plan survives contact with the enemy is completely correct, completely accurate. But Grant's ability to improvise and react makes him one of the best generals of the American Civil War, and not recognizing that is a true disservice. I like George Thomas a great deal. I admire the man. I think he's underrated in American history, in American military history. But I also believe that George Thomas never would have tried to storm Missionary Ridge. Thomas was a cautious, careful, methodical general. Grant was willing to try something, and it could have been a disastrous failure. But sometimes instead, it turns out to be a glorious success. And the federal casualties at the Battle certainly the federal casualties in the Army of the Cumberland storming Missionary Ridge were far less than everybody expected. Sherman's casualties were higher, but he was repeatedly assaulting a fortified position unsuccessfully. So I take that away. Don't view this as Grant's master plan, but instead view it as the essential building block that elevates him to command of the armies and shows off a lot of his best qualities, even in the face of adversity. Thank you. That concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Dave. I'm going to stop the recording and take advantage of my position